Chronic fatigue syndrome is one of the most frustrating and debilitating health conditions a woman can have. It impacts every part of your life and there's no miracle cure, leaving you exhausted but desperately trying to find solutions. Dietary modification is certainly no miracle cure, but research and experience shows that it can be helpful in many cases. So in this episode of Nourish, I have the privilege of interviewing dietitian, chronic fatigue syndrome researcher and chronic fatigue syndrome sufferer, Stacey Vas, for her expert and personal opinion. Stay tuned. Welcome to Nourish. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Melanie and I'm a dietitian who specialises in early life nutrition, from preconception through to toddlerhood and all things women's health. Today, I'm joined by dietitian Stacey Vas to discuss chronic fatigue syndrome. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you, Mel.
So, Stacey, can you tell us a little bit about your personal story and when and how were you diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome?
So I feel like I've been, living with chronic fatigue all my life. I was probably diagnosed about 12 years ago, but lots of frequent trips to the doctor's office and then eventually diagnosed. I think about 5 years into it. And that's my story.
Yeah. So did you have your suspicions before you were diagnosed then?
Yeah, I had glandular fever, a really bad bout of glandular fever in high school, and it really affected my exams, and I couldn't sit my exams. But that went on for about a month. That really debilitating fatigue.
Yeah.
And then just months after, felt like I was just nothing, just on the floor.
Yeah.
So that kind of went on for a few more months, and then, get the regular blood tests for iron and the normal things that you test for investigating fatigue. And as I said, lots of trips to the doctors, and then eventually was referred to a chronic fatigue specialist. And
Was that a big relief off your shoulders then?
It was, but it wasn't the answer that I was hoping for, because he basically said, you've got a small tank now, and you're going to have to manage that because your battery life isn't like everyone else, from day to day. Yeah.
And so was it the same when you were a kid, that you had that really small battery life, or can you see a difference of going through a stage in life where you did have a lot more energy and like maybe pre-glandular fever, something along those lines?
No, actually. I feel like throughout childhood I was really full of energy and did normal things, and throughout high school I went to lots of parties and always felt like really full of life.
Yeah, and then, so you can see
and the massive
clear difference.
Yeah, and then after glandular fever I kind of grieved that kind of life, because I'm like, I wasn't always like this.
Yes.
And I can remember what it was like having energy. And it's so different because you do feel exhausted. And then you can go to bed and wake up and, you're kind of recharged and you feel great again. But after I had that glandular fever bout, it was, you'd go to bed and you'd wake up and just feel exhausted, like you hadn't slept. So I missed that, not being able to recharge, and then it's just been a journey of balancing. I've done too much, I need to pull back a bit now, and balancing life and work. So it's been a bit of a journey and figuring out what's right for me.
Have you met many other people with chronic fatigue in your journey?
Yeah, I actually have a close friend, and she was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and lupus, so she's very well aware of chronic fatigue, because that's characteristic of those conditions as well.
Yeah, that would, I guess, help a little bit to not feel so isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that she pulled back on a lot of social events.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, that's okay to do that, because that's normal if you've got this type of condition.
Yep. And what about fertility and pregnancy? That's the area that our clinic specialises in. So yeah, obviously you're not up to that stage yet, but I know that you've done your research. So can you tell me, what considerations somebody or a couple where one of the partners has got chronic fatigue syndrome, what they might need to consider in terms of fertility and pregnancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can rest assured, all the research shows that chronic fatigue doesn't affect fertility or pregnancy outcomes, so it doesn't increase your risk of anything like gestational diabetes or low birth weights or anything like that. So you can, rest assured that you know that you're not going to have any higher risk of any conditions when you are pregnant. It's more so of balancing that fatigue, because as we know, during pregnancy you get tired, and that's a common thing that women experience. So if you have chronic fatigue, women worry, will I be able to cope with fatigue on top of fatigue? And the research shows actually it can stay the same, it can get worse, or it can get better, but you won't know what category you fall into until you do get pregnant. Yeah.
Thank you for those tips. Now, what about in terms of nutrition? So for people who have been recently diagnosed with chronic fatigue, or maybe they've had it for quite a while but just starting to think about nutrition now, what are some of the key messages that you'd like to share? Yeah,
so there's not a lot of research on chronic fatigue and what nutritionally can help with it. Generally the guidelines recommend that you're eating enough. So usually with chronic fatigue, sometimes you're just too tired to eat because you're just exhausted. So you forget to eat, or people, forget to eat. So making sure that you're eating regular meals and snacks, and making sure they're nutritious as well, because again, when you're really tired, you tend to go for really convenient foods, like highly processed foods. So they're not very good because they don't actually provide proper nutrition and nutrients for proper energy production and repair, which is what your body needs when you do have chronic fatigue, because they think the mechanism behind chronic fatigue can be caused by inflammation. They think that inflammation can play a role in fatigue. So again, all those processed foods don't and aren't very good for that. So we generally recommend, or I've had a look at the research, and they generally recommend that you're eating anti-inflammatory foods, or going with a dietary pattern that is good for anti-inflammatory.
So can you maybe share some tips on, because as you're saying, it's much easier said than done. If you're exhausted, it's hard to be having that nutritious diet and having all those anti-inflammatory foods, when in reality you just want to dial a meal delivery service. So for you in your life, how can you share some tips of how you've managed to have such a nourishing diet?
Yeah, I think it helps that I'm a dietitian and that I know
sure it does.
to have anti-inflammatory foods, but I've read a lot about the Mediterranean diet and follow that quite closely or loosely based on the Mediterranean diet. So I'm making sure that I'm having 5 serves of vegetables a day, 2 serves of fruit, 5 serves of whole grains, and the Mediterranean diet also recommends lots of fish and olive oil, so I try and pop that into my diet as much as I can. And I try to look for really convenient meals that are healthy. So as I said, if I'm looking for, if I know I need to have vegetables, prepackaged salads at the supermarket because they're convenient and I can quickly grab that, or a tin of salmon because fish is really good for anti-inflammatory and omega-3s. So I usually wander the supermarket and have a look at, this is what I need and this is convenient, and I pop it in the fridge, make sure I have it. So
Yeah.
on the days that I am feeling quite tired, I know that I can grab something quick and nutritious.
Yeah, fantastic. Some great tips. Is there anything else that you would like to share with people who, as I said, have either just been diagnosed with chronic fatigue, or maybe waiting for that diagnosis, or also maybe just starting to think about how nutrition may play a role in their chronic fatigue?
Yeah, so my tips would be to know your limits and pull back when you need to, because usually with chronic fatigue they call it post-exertional malaise. So what that means is that if you're concentrating or have a high mental activity or physical activity, that can cause fatigue maybe hours later, and that can last up to 24 hours. So knowing that, don't push yourself when you are, thinking really hard, or, and that's really hard because people are at work and they have to do that. But yeah, knowing your limits and saying, okay, I need to, look after myself and pull back a bit. That would be my number one, and knowing when to rest in that case. And yeah, as I said, making sure that you've got healthy snacks, healthy meals ready to go in the fridge. Yeah, and also I think it's kind of overlooked, but hydration is really important. Just because when we're dehydrated, it affects our performance, just with everyone, but more so if you've got chronic fatigue, because you're already tired, and if you're not getting enough fluid in, it can really compound the symptoms.
I think that's something that a lot of people don't realise, how important hydration is for fatigue. Yeah, and it is. It's so important. So Stacey, slightly off topic, but I'm just wondering if you've read any of the research around low FODMAP diets, and well, not necessarily chronic fatigue syndrome. I think it's more about fatigue before people have been officially diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. But yeah, if you've experienced that yourself, if you've trialled it yourself, or if you've read any research around it.
Yeah, so there is some research that shows that a low FODMAP diet can improve symptoms of fatigue in people with fibromyalgia. So yeah, I think that it could be, you won't know, but you can trial a low FODMAP diet and it might improve symptoms of fatigue, and then yeah, that's great. And if you can do it under the guidance of a dietitian, because it can be quite difficult to follow a low FODMAP diet and to stick to it. And I think the problem is with low FODMAP diets is that people go on it for too long and not really introduce,
not do the challenges.
So yeah, I think it can definitely help if you haven't been diagnosed and you wanted to trial something else, because yeah, the research is there with fibromyalgia.
Just that's one of the strategies that I've trialled with clients in the past. Sometimes with success, sometimes not with success.
Oh, interesting.
So and I think it was interesting as well how you were mentioning about just making sure that people really had those thorough blood tests for nutrients, and not just blood tests, but also that nutrition assessment to see if people are lacking in nutrients that are going to impact their energy levels, because I find that's something that doctors often overlook. And so have you found that with people as well?
I think, and well, iron's probably the major one with fatigue. So if you're experiencing debilitating fatigue, it's actually really common that women are iron deficient, and that's globally. When we're menstruating every month, we might not be eating, we might be vegan, so we're not eating red meat, and then we're not supplementing that with other foods high in iron. So yeah, we're more prone to deficiency, so it's good to rule those types of things out before getting those intensive assessments with chronic fatigue specialists and whatnot.
Stacey, you mentioned iron, and there's loads of other micronutrients that we tend to look at for chronic fatigue as well. Do you want to maybe choose one more that you'd like to talk about in a bit more detail? Yeah,
actually there's been a bit of research about magnesium, and low magnesium levels have been associated, in chronic fatigue, or it actually, low magnesium levels have been associated with brain inflammation. So what magnesium does in the brain is it stops neurons from overfiring, which can eventually lead to the death of them. So that actually contributes to some of the neuropsychological symptoms of chronic fatigue. So that brain fog, difficulties concentrating, memory problems. So all of those, all of those symptoms they've associated with, low magnesium levels. So magnesium-rich foods, really important to include in your diet. So things like dark leafy green vegetables, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, and my favourite, dark chocolate. Really good for magnesium. Yeah.
I was waiting for you to mention that one. Oh, very good. Yeah, well, so many important ways that nutrition can play a role, and that's why I don't know what your thoughts are, but I certainly think it's a great idea for people who've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue to have an appointment with a dietitian who is experienced in this area, because there's a lot to consider, really, isn't there? Yeah,
and there's so many different things you can try nutritionally. The research might not be there, but there are so many things that you can do nutritionally to support your body. So absolutely, you should book in an appointment.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience as well. It was, really kind of you, so thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Mel.
And thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe and share it with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you in our next video. And I just lost all the words in the description box below. And